And the way we protect our children is by training them. Tonight we're going to talk about early child training. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it." Later in the week, we're going to emphasize that first word. The first word is not control. You can control a person, and it doesn't mean that you've trained their heart. The first word is train. Now, there's going to be some controlling you do as a parent. But parents who stop at controlling haven't done the job that children need. And it won't have the lasting effect that's needed. What's called for is training the child so that the child then loves God, loves his neighbor as himself, and he wants to serve God, and he will want to do that long after we're gone. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Now, I believe this is a truism. Proverbs has a lot of truisms. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1 that we mentioned this morning, that I forgot how to quote, grievous words stir up anger, a soft answer turns away wrath. Would everybody agree that that's generally true? Can you find an occasion where somebody gives a soft answer and somebody insists on blowing their stack anyway? Well, yeah, you might find that. Can you find an occasion where grievous words don't stir up wrath? Yeah, if it's grievous words with a bunch of police officers with guns and German shepherds, it might not stir up wrath. The person may back off. But there's a general truth to it. You can find exceptions now and then, but this is a very important truism. Proverbs 29:15 says this, "A rod and reproof impart wisdom, but a child who is unrestrained brings shame to his mother." So, child training. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it. I want to share with you what one of my goals in life is. So, I want to have faithful children, and my children are, but I want more than that. I want my children's children to be faithful. I would like their children to be faithful. And after the family doesn't even remember my name and I'm long gone, I would like for them to continue to be lights in the world, shedding lights in the world, shedding lights in the world. We will have decreasing influence as generations go by. But what I would like to have what my father has. So my father, some of you know him, Dale, my father's 90 years old. And every other year, we all go to his place for Thanksgiving, the whole family, from him down. This year, I believe it'll be 48. And Dad's children serve the Lord. Their children serve the Lord. And then the next generation is serving the Lord, the ones that are old enough. All of the adults are Christians. In that 48 people, nobody's been in a divorce. Nobody has a drug problem. Nobody has an alcohol problem. Nobody shows up, with, weird pink hair and a whole bunch of metal and announcing their pronouns. And the children are well trained and raised. And I love that for him, that's his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. I will be a very happy man if when I'm 90, that same thing happens. It may not, but here's what I want to share with you. If I take a pad like this and I write on it, all right, love God, and all right, love your neighbor. I've just written two very important things. And if I don't press down very hard, you can read it on page 1, but you can't read it on page 2. But you know what? If I decide to really bear down on page 1, what happens when you turn the page? You can still read it. And what happens when you turn to the next page? You can still read it. And if you made a firm enough impression, you know what? You go to the next page and you can still read it. Now, eventually, you're going to find a page that what? It bears no impression from this page back here. But it doesn't matter if we've taught our children that principle and they firmly impress it upon their children. Because if after I'm gone, my children are firmly impressing that to their children, and after they're gone, they are firmly impressing that, then after we're out of the picture and nobody even remembers our name, how many of you know the name of your mother's grandmother's father? No, there we go. A few of you, but most of us don't. But if they were Christians and they taught their children to teach their children to teach their children, you see, the thing that's important can stick. You and I being remembered isn't the important thing. Serving God is the important thing. So, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Back when I started putting this series together, there'd been a book not long after that. Judith Harris wrote. It was a terrible book. It was Do Parents Really Matter? It was about the nature and nurture argument. And she basically said in the book that children are going to be what they are based on simply two things: their peers and their DNA. The parents don't make really any difference at all. The difference she said they did make is that since the child will be controlled by their peers and their DNA, you want them to have the best peers they can have. So she said, make sure you make enough money to live in the best school district so they'll be with the best kids. The most expensive school district doesn't mean it's the best kids, by the way, but that was the premise. And then she said, because looks are important, you want to be sure to make enough money to dress them in the latest fashions so that they'll be accepted by their peer group. And you might want to spring for braces or plastic surgery, to help their appearance. But other than that, there's not much you can do as a parent. And it occurred to me that the way some people parent, that might be true. And of course, by now, social media is the other thing you would put in there. DNA, peers, and social media. When people don't raise their children and train their children, guess what they will be controlled by? Their DNA, their peers, and the entertainment and social media. When we do the job, that's very, very, very different. It makes a huge difference. Time issues. So a lot of you, I imagine, plant a garden in the spring. How many of you plant a garden in the spring? All right, very good. If you plant a garden in the spring, and I'm your neighbor and I plant a garden in the spring, and throughout the summer you go out there and check your garden, and if weeds are in it, you pull them out. If a rabbit's getting in there, you put up a little fence. If it's been dry, you water it. You might check the soil and give it some nutrients. What are you going to have at harvest time? You're going to have a nice crop of vegetables. If I sow some seed in the spring and ignore it all summer, what am I going to have at harvest time? I'm going to have a lot of weeds. And I might look over the fence at your garden and I might say, well, you're lucky. You had easy vegetables. No, you weren't lucky. You know what you did? You cared about your garden. You protected your garden. You took care of your garden. That's why you got the results that you did. And so it's our choice whether we put in the effort or not. Here's something else that's interesting. How long does a mama cat have with her kittens? How long does Mama Robin have with baby Robin? A cat, 10 to 12 weeks, usually. A bird takes babies about 2 weeks to leave the nest or fledge, then they usually stay with their parents 2 or 3 weeks after that. So if you're a baby robin, you peck out of your shell, you start fledging, you start flying, and 2 or 3 weeks later, you can go away. Now, I see a little baby girl over there. There's other babies out here. There's a baby right there. And they both look a lot more than 2 weeks old. And they have not flown away from their parents yet. And what a ridiculous thing if we expected our 2-week-old infant to be able to survive on their own. God didn't make human babies like he made cats and birds. For one thing, a human baby needs to learn a lot more than how to eat a worm and flap its wings. We need to learn a lot of things about character. We need to learn a lot of things about God and holiness and reverence and self-denial and just all sorts of character lessons. And God has made your children such that they are dependent upon you for years and years and years and years and years before they go out on their own. Why would God do that? And what does God expect us to do with that time? It's our job to use that time God gave us to train our children. So Deuteronomy chapter 6. Again, let's turn there and read that again. Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is after they're old enough. We're about to start talking about very little ones. This is when they're old enough to hear and understand. But I tell you what, even little ones are sponges. They're learning and observing all the time. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Lord, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That's the verse Jesus quotes when he's asked what's the greatest commandment. Verse 6, these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. By the way, bring your kids to Bible class. But this verse doesn't say, take your children to Bible class so someone else will teach them. Take your children to Bible class. Let them have that opportunity to be with other kids and learn those extra lessons there, but that's not enough. It's not enough to feed a child 2 meals a week and expect them to be healthy. And it's not enough for them to have guidance twice a week and expect them to have character. You teach and train your children. It says, when you rise up, when you lie down, when you walk in the way. The importance of starting early child training. And this is where we're going to focus the bulk of our time this evening. Child Training 101 is kind of basic vocabulary. This word right here, means that right there. Okay? No means no. What are some of the very first words that your children learned how to say? Probably some of you, the child's first word was mommy, right? Or mama or something like that. Every once in a while there's a child that says daddy before mama. But what's one of the other words that a child learns, one of the first words they learn? It's no. This is so crucial with children. Early child training in no. I want you to think about the importance of no. In Genesis chapter 2, turn back to Genesis chapter 2 and look at verse 17. God creates man, and he says what in verse 17? Verse 16, he put him in the garden, and there's all these wonderful trees, and he says, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. That's God's rule. How old was Adam? Adam's new to the world. How mature was Adam? I assumed that when God created Adam, he didn't create him looking like a one-day-old baby. I assumed he created him looking like a grown man. But he's not. He doesn't have the experience of a grown man. He's new to the world. He doesn't have the wisdom. He doesn't have the knowledge. And God gave him a rule. And what is it? It's Adam, you see this tree right here? This tree right here? That tree's a no-no. You can have all these other ones. And this one, no, no. Well, later Eve has come along and she decides she wants that. And then Adam partakes of it too, and they're removed from the garden. There's consequences when the father said no and the child disobeyed the no. Stop and think also of when the children of Israel came out of Egypt. Now they are grown people. The 40-year-old was 40 years old, the 30-year-old was 30 years old. But if you think about the conduct of the Israelites as a generation, how many of you would describe them as a mature group of people? Remember all that murmuring in the wilderness and whining and everything? It's not a great depth of maturity in general in that generation. And you know what a whole lot of the Ten Commandments were? No-nos. Now, you wouldn't have to have those for more mature people. What does it say in Romans chapter 13? Paul says, if you will love your neighbor as yourself, that's going to take care of the no killing, no coveting, no stealing, etc., etc. Romans chapter 13, around verse 8, 9, 10. You don't do those things to people that you care about. But they needed some specifics, and we've needed specifics too, and so you have them. No stealing. No murdering. No taking the Lord's name in vain. No adultery. No coveting. Our children need this too. Learning to respect and comply to the prohibitory no. And let's mention this. If you don't mean it, don't say it. If you do mean it, enforce it. Being a good parent doesn't mean you say no all the time. If your child asks, can I go play in the highway? The answer should be no. If the child says, can I do something else and it's a good thing, say yes. And it may be something important to do. It may be something fun to do. It may be a special treat. There should be lots of yeses in life. Have fun with your kids. Enjoy your kids. They're not going to be little forever. Just enjoy them. Have lots of yeses. But when it's no, it should stay no. What did Jesus say in Matthew 5, talking about instead of swearing? He said, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. I had a friend in high school, and his mother had a tendency to start with no, and no, and he could argue until she would give up. And he just resented that woman, just despised her, and she didn't produce respect in him because she would start with no, and he could just argue her way out of it. That's not being a parent. If it's no, then it's no. And I'm going to tell you something. This is a little bit of an overstatement, but I think there's a lot of truth to this. So we've raised 6 kids. We had, our first child was born in '84, and we had a child every presidential election from Ronald Reagan until just before Barack Obama. So we had kids in house in '84, and we became empty nesters in '23. Our youngest went away for college last year, or a year and a half ago. And so we raised 3 boys, 3 girls, and I will tell you, in my opinion, teaching a small child to respect no, but also not giving a defiant no. When you accomplish that with a 1-year-old, and you can accomplish that with a 1-year-old, half of your job as a parent is already done. There's going to be more challenges. There's going to be more challenges when they're 3 and 5 and 6 and 9 and 10 and 11, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18. But the fundamentals that are in that no, once they learn to respect that no at a young age, you've laid the foundation for the rest. I'll explain more about that in a minute. But here's a vocabulary test. What does no mean to your child? If you got 3 kids, stop and think about each one. What does no mean to this child? What does no mean to this child? What does no mean to this child? If your child thinks no means throw a tantrum, then you're not doing what you need to do as a parent. Now, if your child threw a tantrum, they will do that sometimes. But then you deal with that so that they understand not to keep doing that. You tell them no, you don't throw tantrums, you enforce it, and you stop the tantrums. It's not that if you parent right, they won't do that. They will. And when they do, that's your opportunity to train them to not keep doing it. We'll talk more about that later. If your child thinks no means the defense attorney may now cross-examine, you're not doing it right. If your child thinks no means don't do it while mom and dad are watching, then they're not being trained. They may be being controlled, but they're not being trained. But when that 1-year-old knows no means no, you're doing what you need to do. Here's what that does. So if you've got a little bitty girl, say she's 1 year old, and you go over to grandma's and there's some expensive crystal or an antique or something, and she walks up and she wants to grab that, and you say, honey, that's a no-no, don't touch that. And she looks at you and she backs away and she plays with a book or a toy. You're doing it right. But if she looks at you and touches it anyway, now you need to teach her that that's no. So April, our first one, and this was probably before she was 1. I remember when she got her first spanking. She decided it was real fun to just take the toilet paper roll and do like this. And Bertina told her, said, April, no, no. And April looked at her and decided, this is a lot of fun, and I'm not going to pay attention to you. And just, off she went. And then Bertina took her little hand, and she gave it a tap and said, no. Mommy said no. And it broke her little heart, and she cried, but she stopped pulling on that, and she realized, oh, Mommy meant that. And you do that with the child when they disobey. You respond patiently, calmly, kindly, but consistently. And they learn Mommy means business, Daddy means business, and when they say no, and it won't be long till that little child, when you say no, they don't. Now, sometimes they'll test it. My niece Holly, when she was little, Libby had some teacups, and she decided, I'm not going to child-proof the house, I'm going to world-proof the child. So she didn't move them out of the way, but when Holly went for them, she said that was no. She said, don't touch that. No. So little bitty Holly knew she couldn't touch it, so she picked up a pencil. She's testing boundaries. So then she found out, no, that's not a loophole. You can't do that, and that type of thing. They'll test, they'll explore, and what they don't need you yelling at them. They don't need you being mad at them. They don't need you and me pretending that they never do anything wrong, just like we talked this morning. We shouldn't pretend that we never do anything wrong, but they need us to patiently and kindly and consistently and firmly not tolerate disobedience to a parental no. And when they learn that, they have learned to respect authority, right? What else have they learned? That little bitty girl or that little bitty boy has learned, I won't always get my way. And he has learned behavior is more important than desire. Because he wants to pick up that sharp thing, or he wants to throw that glass thing or something. You're saying, no. And he wants to, but he understands he needs to behave, and he's learning behavior is more important than desire. And in submitting to that, he's learning self-denial and self-control. So all 4 of these things can be taught to that 1-year-old. And that 1-year-old can learn to respect authority. I won't always get my way. Behavior is more important than desire. Self-denial, they have to be able to have self-denial and self-control. They don't know these words, but they understand that word no, and they know mama loves them. And they know mama does lots of other things that they can do. And mama plays with them and has fun with them and spends time with them, and daddy plays with them and does fun things and does time with them. But when daddy says no, they realize that's no. Now, when they learn that at 1, and that's part of their character, is that going to help them when they go to a party when they're 17? If they've learned from early that you need to respect authority, you won't always get your way. Behavior is more important than desire, and it's important to have self-denial and self-control. What's going to happen when they go to that party? It's going to serve them well to have those things in their character. If they didn't learn that at 1, and they didn't learn it at 2, and they didn't learn it at 3, and they didn't learn it at 4, and at 4 you're saying no and they're still doing it, like one mom I watched one time, her like 11-year-old. He's climbing up to get something. She said, no, don't get that. No. I said, no, get down. Do you hear me? I said, get down. Don't do that. No. And he's just ignoring her. He goes up and get it. And she goes, I'm going to get him hearing aids. There wasn't anything wrong with his hearing. He looked down and he heard what she was saying. And there he is, 11 years old, and he hasn't still learned this that she should have taught him at 1. Now, what's going to happen when he goes to a party at 16 or 17? I've got a friend. He and his buddy were at a party at about that age. And somebody came up and had a new drug. And they said, hey, Pete said he'll do it if you'll do it. And the other guy, my friend, said he wasn't going to do it. Pete decided to do it anyway. And right there, that road difference made the difference. My friend's life has turned out to be just wonderful. He ended up becoming a Christian, married a wonderful woman, raised wonderful kids. I've had dinner at his child and in-law's house. Just wonderful people, wonderful influence in the church, just got a wonderful life. Pete ended up addicted, ended up institutionalized because of all the brain damage, and some years ago passed away. Would have been good for Pete if he would have learned this lesson, if somebody would have taught it to him. This is an important foundation, and learning to submit to an earthly father prepares the child for submission to a far more important father. Sometimes as a parent, you may say something, and then you find out the child really wanted to do it, and you start thinking, well, I kind of wish I hadn't said no. And they throw a little tantrum, you decide to give up, or you just ignore it, or you say, I'm going to get you a hearing aid or something. You're failing to use that opportunity to train the child. It's at the test of wills that the training can especially occur. And don't feel selfish. Don't think, but I feel so mean not letting them get what they want. Well, if it was something they should have had, you should have said yes the first time. But if you thought it was no, now let me say this. If you've got an older child who has learned to respect authority, they respect your authority, all those lessons they've learned, and you've got an older child and she says, Mom, can I go over to my friend's house? We're going to do this and help this. And you say, no, you need to work on your term paper that's coming up. If then she respectfully says, Mom, can I explain something about that, please? You say, yes. And she said, I knew the term paper was coming up, so we worked on that a whole lot last night, and we got that mostly completed. But she was wanting to know if I could come over. We're going to help make some things for sister so-and-so. She's sick, and I wanted to help with that. And the term paper's mostly done, and I can finish it up tomorrow. Now, yes, this is not somebody throwing a tantrum or something else. This is you're developing a relationship with the child where they've respectfully given you information. In a time like that, a wise parent would say, what? Oh, thank you for explaining. Yeah, sure. Go ahead and do that. I'm not saying you lock in, like that. But when you're dealing with somebody throwing a tantrum, do you remember the pirates, the Somali pirates? Why did they throw tantrums? Why did they capture ships? Because it paid off. Why do kids throw tantrums? Because it paid off. Don't let bad behavior pay off. And if you start to feel guilty, but I feel like it's your job. And when they learn that, that's preparing them to obey somebody far more important than you. And how many of you have seen adults in a church who still haven't learned to respect authority, still haven't learned self-denial, still haven't learned that they don't always get their own way? You ever seen grown adults like that? It's not a pretty picture. Children can learn that, and childhood is a good time. Last point I want to go over is respect and compliance for the prohibitory no. There should be a zero tolerance for the defiant and rebellious no. I remember when I was a teenager, and I had seen kids who would go like, no. And I decided, I'm never having kids like that. And I didn't. I'm not going to tell you that out of all 6 kids over however many years it's been since 1984, that I never heard a no. But if I did, it was made very clear that that was not to happen again. You don't tolerate that. One time there was a mom who kept having trouble with her child. She was in a situation where the first child was easy and a pleaser, and the next child wasn't, and she kept feeling there's something wrong with that child. I hope we have time to talk about that Wednesday night, because she was very wrong. And she resented this child, and she got into a battle where she was resentful of the child was resentful of her, and she would say, there's something wrong with him. She would call me in the home, listen to him. I would take him for hours at a time, and he'd behave fine with me. And said, that's because he's with you. And I said, if there was something wrong with him, he wouldn't be able to behave with me either. But I was one time there we were at a Bible study, and she told him to do something, and he turned to do it, but as he did, he went, no, and walked away. And then later, she starts on this thing, I don't understand why he's the way that he is. She didn't know that I'd heard that. And see, when he did that, she didn't do anything about it. And then a few minutes later, she's complaining about the child. And I said, well, part of the problem is that you tolerate things like a while ago when he said no. And she goes, you heard that? I said, yeah. And her attitude was, one time she said, I just don't have time to deal with all the disobedience. If your child comes home with lice, are you going to have to take some time to deal with that? Yes. What if you decide you don't have to take time to deal with it? It's going to get worse. Take time to deal with it. Don't put up with a defiant and rebellious no. So if you do that for your small child can learn that. And you planted the foundation. And it's going to help you avoid having an upside down home. If you're looking to buy a house, you might want to buy that one, but nobody wants to buy that one. That one's upside down. And there are too many homes all around this city and this country where little children run the home and the parents are out of control. And that's not doing them a favor at all. The child needs to understand it's not child first, parents, and then God's way down there. No, they need to learn God's first, then the father, then the mother, and then the child. And the child needs to know that it's loved, and it's played with, and it's cared for, and it's secure. And it's not screamed at, and it's not yelled at, but it's trained. And the training that you do for that little 1-year-old is going to reap a bountiful harvest when they're 2, because then you don't have the terrible 2s, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and on. Thank you so much for your attention. And if you find yourself as an adult here, and you realize that you've had a wrong relationship with God because God has been saying, no, don't do this, and you've been throwing tantrums, and you've been ignoring it, and you've not been using self-control and self-denial, you need to learn the same lesson before God that children need to learn before their parents. We're not designed to be the center of the universe. We're designed to serve the King of the universe, and his commandments are for our good. If you need to submit your life to the Lord, won't you do that as we stand and sing?